Hello, Mishpacha, it's Courtney, America's Jewish mother. I am here today to do my reading wrap-up for the week and also my Summer School Readathon wrap-up. So, in case you haven't heard me mention this at least 5 or 6 times already, the Summer School Readathon, which took place for the entire month of July, was hosted by Doris at Aldi Books. So I will, actually first I'm going to wrap up what I read in the past week, and then I will tell you about all of the books that I read for the Summer School Readathon and which categories and prompts they fit into and things like that. So let us get into the books that I finished in the past week, and there were 5 of them, which seems like a lot, but it's actually not as much as it seems like, because 2 of them I had been reading before, so I only really started and finished within the past week 5 books, but one of them was almost 500 pages, so that counts, right? That's a lot. So anyway, so the first one was 4 plays by Eugene O'Neill. So I mentioned this in my last Friday Reads video. So this has some of his earlier plays. They were all written between 1920 and 1922, and these were really the first plays that sort of got his career off the ground and really put him into the public eye, and he won Pulitzer Prizes for 2 of them, I think, Beyond the Horizon and Anna Christie, both of which are family dramas, and then the other 2 plays in this collection are The Emperor Jones and The Hairy Ape, both of which are more sort of experimental plays. And I think especially with The Emperor Jones and The Hairy Ape, because there are all of these stage directions that go with them, you feel like you really would get the full effect more if you saw it performed on the stage, you know, because you can tell from all of the stage directions that it's intended to have certain effects, right? That you're not getting if you're just reading it. But even so, you still kind of get the idea. So I enjoyed these plays. I felt like Eugene O'Neill does a good job at building dramatic tension in a scene, from act to act and from scene to scene. Like I said, Beyond the Horizon and Anna Christie are both family dramas. Beyond the Horizon is about the relationship between these 2 brothers who were sort of caught in a love triangle with the same woman. And then Anna Christie is about a father-daughter relationship that is also sort of muddied up because of the daughter's interest in this man that the father doesn't approve of. So yeah, they're all sort of about 2 men and a woman, but just in different combinations. And then The Emperor Jones and The Hairy Ape are more single character studies of a particular individual. In The Emperor Jones, it's a man named Brutus Jones who is originally from the United States, but has somehow come to be the ruler of this island in the Caribbean through sort of trickery and deception. But you can see from the first scene of the play that his days are numbered, and the native peoples are getting kind of restless, and they're probably fixing to rebel against him and possibly kill him. So he decides he is going to escape off the island in the dead of night, and he has to cross this dark forest in order to do that. And while he is crossing the forest, he has to confront sort of his inner demons and memories of things that have haunted him from his previous life in the United States. And then The Hairy Ape is about a man named, I think his actual name is Robert Smith, but he's referred to as Yank, and he works as a coal stoker on a ship, and he's sort of a natural born leader in that particular environment. But you see him within the first couple of scenes of the play become very sort of tormented by this incident that happens fairly early on, where this young woman who's from a fairly well-to-do family asks if she can come down and observe the what do you call that place where they stoke the coal? The furnace room. The furnace room of the ship, I guess, is sort of like a weird sociological observation, or, you know, people did that in the early 20th century. So anyway, so she asks somebody who works on the ship if she can come down there and do that. And then when she sees Yank, who, you know, to her mind is very crude and brash and ill-mannered and not what you would think of as an early 20th century version of civilized, and she's so disturbed by his gruff manner and appearance that she calls him a filthy beast and faints dead away, you know, clutching her invisible pearls, you know, or something. So anyway, so Yank is sort of tormented by that for pretty much the rest of the play, where he kind of seeks to figure out what is his identity, what is his place in a world that looks at him as a hairy ape, as the title implies. So yeah, I enjoyed this. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. I felt like some of the relationships between characters, especially in Beyond the Horizon and Anna Christie, could have been fleshed out a bit more. I did feel like the woman characters came off a little flat. And definitely in Anna Christie too, there were some relationships that were alluded to at the beginning that you never then saw or heard from again by the end, which I was a little frustrated by. But I mean, otherwise I thought they were good plays, especially if you're interested in early American drama. Eugene O'Neill was in fact the first American playwright to win the Nobel Prize in literature, so I would recommend it, again, if you're interested in early American drama. So yeah, 3.5 stars. I then finished my buddy read, the long-awaited ending of Henry James's Portrait of a Lady that I was reading with my friend Taylor from graduate school. Now he and I started this in June. It's now the end of July, so you do the math. It took us 2 months to read this book. So this is the story of Isabel Archer, and when we meet her at the beginning of this novel, she's an American who has come to visit her family in England, and we kind of just follow her journey. She, by the way, she never goes back to America. She stays in Europe literally the whole rest of the book. So we sort of follow her journey around, and at the beginning of this book, she's 23. She wants to see the world. She's not really that interested in settling down. She definitely values her freedom, independence, and ability to choose above all else. And I would say that part is true throughout the entire book, that she heavily values her ability to choose. So in that respect, even though I don't necessarily agree with or like all of the choices that Isabel makes in the course of this book, I would 100% call this a feminist novel, because it has a strong focus on Isabel's need to and right to choose things for herself and make decisions in her own life. And again, whether I agree with them or not, I don't, but she does choose. Nobody else chooses for her. She's the one who makes all of the choices, and so for that reason I would call this a feminist novel. I'm really glad that I read this, and I'm definitely glad that I had Taylor to read it with, because otherwise I think it might have been hard for me to make it all the way through, so it was good to kind of have that accountability. This was not a particularly easy book to get through. There were definitely long stretches in the narration where Henry James, as a narrator, was very self-aware and, you know, gave me all these details about things that didn't necessarily move the story along that well. I loved it when the characters were together and having dialogue and interacting with each other. All of those parts were great. But yeah, the narration definitely did drag at times, so I'm glad that I had someone to read this with me so that I would be accountable to finish it. So I would not say it's necessarily an easy book to read. It's not like a page turn or anything, but I'm very glad I read it. It has a lot of very interesting things to say about love and family relationships and friendships and marriage and human nature, like all of these big checkbox things that I look for in a book. Like, it has really interesting things to say about all of those. So again, even though it was not necessarily an easy read, it's something that I think it was very worthwhile for me to have read, and I'm glad that I read it. So I ended up giving this 3.75 stars. I would recommend it if you are willing to put in the necessary effort, because to me, I think the payoff was worth it, but I know not everyone will feel that way. So that was Portrait of a Lady. I also finished this week for my virtual book club that is run by Lindsay at Lindsay's Book Life, Silver Sparrow by Tayari Jones. I also mentioned this in my Friday Reads video last week. This is a story of two sisters, half-sisters. They have the same father, different mothers, and the book is basically divided in half. One of the first half is told from the perspective of Dana, who is one of the two sisters, and the second half of the book is told from the perspective of Charisse, who is the other half-sister. And Dana and Dana's mother are her father's second family, And Charisse and her mother, who are the first family, do not know about the existence, of Dana and her mother, whereas Dana and Dana's mother know about Charisse and her mother. So, you know, having that set up basically at the beginning, you know that at some point in the course of this book, things are gonna come out, and that's pretty much exactly what happens, but you find out all of these other things about the characters in the meantime. And you also, it's in some ways also a coming of age story, because we start off with the girls when they're about 11 or 12, and then we follow them until they're about 17 or so. And yeah, so we kind of see them grow up at the same time too. And we see what sort of inner problems they struggle with while they're growing up, as well as what their family relationships are like, and what they would like them to be like. So I really like this. I found it very easy to read. Tayari Jones is a very good writer. Her writing is very effortless and clear, and I like that about her a lot. And I felt like the two characters were pretty well distinguished from one another, and I felt like all of the major characters in this novel came off as well-rounded and sympathetic, even the bigamist father, which I thought was an accomplishment. So I liked this. I would recommend it. I ended up giving this 4 stars. I also just finished today this collection of poetry called Whereas by Layli Longsoldier. Y'all, I loved this collection so much. I gave this 4.5 stars. I was just totally blown away by it. Layli Longsoldier does something here that is very rare, which is that she manages to deftly unify experimental poetry with experiential poetry. So experiential poetry is really poetry that tells you something about someone's identity, or their identity in relation to, you know, sociocultural factors or things like that. And she combines both of these things in this volume, and I just thought she did such a brilliant job of it. I don't see it very often. This is in fact the best poetry collection I've read since Evie Shockley's The New Black, which I read last year and really loved. So if you are a fan of experimental or avant-garde poetry, I would 100% recommend this. If you like poetry that's sort of more easily digestible, then this is probably not the collection for you, because she has a very strong focus on language from start to finish, and she interrogates it, she dissects it, she thinks about the meanings of individual words that we use, she thinks about what our sentences mean, she thinks about form and structure and all of those things. And in fact, whoops, flew right out of my hand there. I was so excited. In fact, there's a poem in here, I don't know if you can see this, where it's literally sort of shaped like a box, and it's called There. It says, "This is how you see me, the space in which to place me. The space in me you see is this place. To see this space, see how you place me in you. This is how to place you in the space in which to see." And a lot of her poems have to do with feeling constrained by language, but it's also clear that she feels constrained by typical poetic form. In fact, there's a poem in here called 38 that talks about the massacre of, or the legalized lynching, I guess, of 38 Dakota people. It says the Dakota 38 refers to 38 Dakota men who were executed by hanging under orders from President Abraham Lincoln. To date, this is the largest legal mass execution in U.S. history. So in actually this poem, she says at the beginning, "Here the sentence will be respected. I will compose each sentence with care by minding what the rules of writing dictate." And then she says a little bit further down, "You may like to know, I do not consider this a creative piece. I do not regard this as a poem of great imagination or a work of fiction. I feel most responsible to the orderly sentence conveyor of thought." So it's interesting that even in a poem where she's talking about ostensibly, right, like some sort of historical injustice that was carried out against Native peoples, because she feels more responsible to convey exactly what was happened in terms of historical facts, she does not want to sort of muddy that by being linguistically playful at the same time. And so she goes to great lengths to say, this is not a creative piece. I'm writing all of the sentences exactly in this way so that you will know exactly what happened, and I'm not embellishing or emphasizing, you know, with any sort of rhetorical flourishes or anything like that. So anyway, I just love this. I thought it was so good. I'm going to stop gushing about it now. But yeah, 4.5 stars. Probably it's going to be my favorite poetry collection of the year. I think it would be very hard for this to be topped by anything else. But we'll see. I still have a few months to go. So that was Whereas by Layli Long Soldier. And then the last book I finished this week was this big behemoth book, this biography of Joseph McCarthy called Demagogue. So as you can see, this is a big old doorstop of a book. I will say it's a little bit longer than it it looks longer than it actually is. The whole biography is actually only about 480 pages, and the last like 120 some pages are taken up by notes and a big old bibliography and index in the book. But this was good. I really didn't know much about Joseph McCarthy other than, you know, the Red Scare, communist witch hunting, McCarthyism, Have You No Decency, right? Like just sort of like normal pop culture things you would know, just like little pieces of trivia. But this was an excellent biography. It was so well researched. Y'all, there are so many sources at the end. So many sources. Government documents, newspaper articles, other previous biographies, letters and emails and interviews with people who knew McCarthy or people who knew McCarthy. Plus, the author of this book, Larry Tye, was the first person to have access to Joseph McCarthy's personal archived documents that are held by Marquette University, which is McCarthy's alma mater. These were donated by McCarthy's widow, Jean Carr, but with the instruction that they be sealed for something like 40 or 50 years. So I think they became available, or they became open to the public in 2017. So Larry Tye was the first person to have access to them, and he uses that in this biography, especially to talk about closed door sessions or interrogations that were held by McCarthy and Roy Cohn and G. David Shine during the Red Scare communist witch hunting years. So yeah, I really like this. I thought it was a great biography. I learned so much about Joseph McCarthy. Number one, I didn't know he served in the Marines in World War II. Number two, he started out as a New Deal Democrat, but then figured that he was never going to win. He was never going to get political power in Wisconsin by staying a Democrat, so he changed to be a Republican instead. And then he's also literally psychotic. So at one point, they were talking about this columnist, Drew Pearson, who was sort of like Walter Winchell. And McCarthy had this beef with him, and he apparently kept a baseball bat. McCarthy kept a baseball bat next to his bed that had Drew Pearson's name etched into it, like a psychopath. So yeah, anyway, so it gives you stuff about his early life and his early sort of bids for political power before he was elected to the United States Senate, and of course gives you in great detail the rise of McCarthyism and his communist witch hunting or anti-communist crusade, if you prefer. And then it tells you also about his relationship with his two assistants when he was head of this, or when he was chair of the Senate subcommittee that performed all of these investigations into people's alleged communist ties between 1953 and 1954. So it tells you about his relationship with Roy Cohn and G. David Shine. It tells you about the Armin McCarthy hearings. It tells you about his fall from grace. And then another thing I didn't know about McCarthy is that he died not long after his fall from grace. He just became more and more of an alcoholic, and he became more and more depressed, and he died at age 48, like, bitter and alone and just really pathetic, like having all of these hallucinations in a hospital bed and having all of these really severe symptoms of alcohol withdrawal. And honestly, y'all, even though I know he's like a really bad person, I felt bad. Like, I felt bad reading about the way he died because it just was so pitiful. So yeah, anyway, this was really good, and it's an excellent biography if you're interested in the McCarthy era or the Red Scare or communism or McCarthyism or you know, anything kind of surrounding that time period, or just the general subject of demagogues and how they think and act, because aside from Trump, this is probably the most famous one in American history. So I ended up giving this 4 stars. Alright, so with that, I'm now going to go through all of the books that I read for the Summer School Readathon. So for the first prompt, which was Literature/Language Arts, I read 2 books. I read Beloved by Toni Morrison, and I read The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. Both of these were 5-star reads for me, and both of these people, Toni Morrison and Kazuo Ishiguro, are both Nobel Prize laureates in literature, and after reading these, I totally get why. So, in social studies, I also read 2 books. One was The Red Tent by Anita Diamant, which I ended up giving 3.25 stars, and then the other book was Amnesty by Aravind Adiga, which I don't have because I checked that out from the library and it's already gone back, and I gave that 3.75 stars. So overall, social studies books that I read got an average of 3.5 stars. For science, I read Michio Kaku's Physics of the Impossible. I also, at the end of June, snuck in an early reading of Brandon Taylor's Real Life. So between Real Life and this, the science books for me got an average rating of 3 stars overall. Math, I read Thomas Pynchon's The Crying of Lot 49, and I also read Katherine Heiny book Standard Deviation, and between those two, this I gave 2.75 stars, the other book I had 3 stars, so it had like an average rating of about 2.9 stars, which is funny because that ranking, right, like language arts, social studies, science, math, is probably how I would like actually rate my enjoyment of each of those subjects, so it's funny that the average ratings for each of the books I read worked out that way. And then Common Core, I read Frank Kermode's The Sense of an Ending, which I gave 2 stars to because it's like elitist, overly complicated literary theory. Ugh. And then William Maxwell's They Came Like Swallows, which I more enjoyed this. I gave this 3.5 stars, so overall Common Core got an overall rating of 2.75 stars from me. And then finally, for research, I read Bettina Love's We Want to Do More Than Survive, which is about her sort of memoir/manual/manifesto on abolitionist teaching. And I read this big old biography of Joseph McCarthy, who I also really didn't know that much about. So, so between these 2 books, they had an average overall rating of, what is that, 3.6? Sorry, I'm looking at my laptop here. 3.6 stars. So yes, that was everything I read for the Summer School Readathon. I want to again say thank you to Doris for hosting this. I really enjoyed it. You got me to read a lot of books because of these prompts that I probably would not have gotten around to on my TBR otherwise. So yeah, I am curious what all you read and particularly enjoyed in your Summer School Readathon readings. Please let me know down in the comments below. I hope you're all staying healthy and well. I hope you're doing good reading. And until next time, would it kill you to call you mother?